Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, when it comes to news, we have the patch, of course, that dropped this week, which was for the Grand Heist. And together with the Grand Heist, CCP decided to lower the taxes for the 4 empires quite substantially, making NPC trading stations competitive with player-owned trading hubs as well. And so this could have a pretty big change, or make for a pretty big change in the dynamic of trading here during this EVE Talk in GTA 4.4. And so far I think it was announced that this would last for like 3 months or something like that. I'm of course very curious to see what the economic numbers are going to look like in the upcoming months. Next to that, CCP also decided to add some ISK into the login rewards for Omega players. I already made a video about that, so we don't have to go into detail there. But I should maybe note this, right, that in the grand scheme of things, it's a tiny amount of ISK. And let's also not forget that CCP does keep track of some ISK flows that the players don't necessarily know about, such as you could say that CCP represents governing bodies, governing NPC bodies in EVE Online, and so I know that they do keep track of like all of the ISK that is paid in taxes to the empires, and so you could say that maybe they have decided to give something back as well, to do a stimulus run. So if CCP had come out with like an explanation for it lore-wise, and then would have actually tied it to a pool of ISK like that, I think there would have been a little bit less hubbub about, well, breaking the sandbox rules and things like that. But CCP also keeps a very close eye on all the ISK and plex and stuff that they take out of the game through banning, and I think that they like attribute that to Concord or something like that. Anyways, there could be like lore-wise explanations as to where this ISK would come from, and overall, again, it's a small package. It's not a lot of ISK that's flowing into the game this way, so it's not like this is going to break the economy. And as I said, potentially this could be part of an experiment that could become very interesting. So we'll see how all of that evolves, of course. But let's move on and take a quick look at the New Eden store here. See if there's anything happening. So still Iceblade Gorilla skin still marked as new. That's been for quite a couple of weeks at this point. Perhaps it's time to put them into the regular type of stuff. And for the services, we don't have anything special or on sale to report there. So we get to move on to the market. As always, we start with some plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 3 minutes. If it wants to write, there we go, timestamp plotted. So let's start maybe with plex, which is declining a little bit from the sell numbers in GTA 4.4, but on the average numbers, so the average transactions have actually gone up over the last week back to that high point of around 2.7 million. So this does mean that now demand has picked up a little bit on all of that extra supply, and that most trades are happening around 2.7 million range. You can see that the sellers are coming in just above 2.7 million, buyers are coming in at 2.64 million, so really narrow margin all of a sudden, showing that pretty strong demand at the current price range. And then of course the big change as well, we don't see this first few pages dominated by the trading hubs in perimeter. This is now also being traded mostly in GTA 4.4 because of the tax changes. That's actually pretty major, because of course the more trade you can do within an NPC station, that is going to, number one, take a lot of revenue away from the owners of those trade hubs in perimeter, and number two, there is the safety aspect that still plays for me personally. I try to keep as little as possible in these trade hubs, and whenever I do grab a purchase there, I try to move it to GTA 4.4 as quickly as possible. So it looks like a little bit of pressure on the sell price of plex, but it's actually a narrowing of the margin between sellers and buyers at the high point of around 2.7 million. And we can also see the volumes that have gone up over the last 3 days. So that is definitely potentially one of the impacts of the lower taxes, increasing the velocity of ISK by just stimulating more trade now that it's cheaper to do so. I think relisting has also become cheaper. After that, we've got the multiple pilot training certificate that has basically stalled its descent, went back down to a price point below 1.3 billion ISK and is now selling for 1.35 billion. So we may be in for a bit of a jump, but what hasn't happened just yet is the closing of the margin. We're still at 1.2 billion for the buyers. That's a pretty sizable difference between the two. Look at the volume increase though, that is very noticeable as well. And then what we have is, let me think here again, the cheapest sellers are in GTA 4.4, no longer in the Tranquility Trading Tower. Next up, we've got the skill extractors to take a quick look at. Of course, very similar chart as with the plex, because they're basically communicating with each other as you create skill extractors through plex purchases in the new Eden store. And then we again have a nice uptick in volumes as well on the patch day with the lowering of the taxes, and GTA selling for 312, Perimeter Trading Tower selling for 309. Very competitive, close prices amongst these two. So that's the impact of the tax changes. 302 million for the buyers, a very narrow margin, just like with plex, which can also be explained of course by the lower taxes. The less taxes you have to pay, the more competitive you can be with your sell price and still eke out a profit. So that closing of the margins is going to be a consequence of that as well. And then yeah, that puts this one in perspective, where we still have that 130 million ISK difference between sellers and buyers of the multiple pilot trades. If it feels like that is still lagging behind a little bit, I'm expecting a little bit of upwards pressure on those buyers. Then we have the injector markets. Let's take a look at those with the large scale injectors that have already stalled their ascent as well. Went up to 630 million and are coming back down. This was definitely a bit of a trade that you could have made if you spotted that bottom well below 600 million, probably well below 570 as well, if you managed to pick up a buy order in these couple of days here, and then sell for 630. That is definitely not a bad deal. 620 million now pretty much for the sellers, and 595 for the buyers below 600. Seeing that pressure here again on these skill injectors. Small scale injectors not declining just yet, managing to stay above 130 million, but clearly that uptrend is stalling here as well. 126 million for the sellers, 117 for the buyers. Narrow margin here between these two, but I think that this also translates into CCP being decently generous with skill points. This is not really, I think, a problem for most players. CCP has increased basically the way that you get skill points, so are we starving for them at the moment? Definitely not. And I think even for new players, you get a very nice clip pace at which you get into new ships, at which you acquire all of these skill points to do stuff in the game. And as a consequence, skill injectors are not all that popular. For the daily alpha injectors, are we talking a different story? Well, we do see the price go back to a 40 million range. 41 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. Last week I was thinking perhaps we were here to stay below 40 million, but that one did make it's come back to that average price of 40 million. I think that's pretty damn good. Also a little bit of an uptick in trade here on the volumes with the lower taxes. Overall, I would say that we still have decent alpha clone activity, definitely a little bit less than look at a year ago. Look at here in January to February. So the war in Nosik probably a very big driver also of alpha activity, and then the daily alpha injector becomes that very nice goal. Make 40 million, get a daily alpha injector, boost your alpha character a little bit. I do think that dynamic is doing quite well in the game, but now there are some signs that the war is heating up again a little bit, so we'll see if that'll have an impact here or not. I do think in Nosik that, you know, groups are a little bit more organized. They've got more limited skill plans, so they know a little bit more what they're doing. This is more, I think, to the more casual alpha players that this will go, not those that join the war, join a very specific large group or something like that. And so seeing that back at 40 million, I'd say that's pretty good news. And then finally, we've got the hypercores that have also started to move sideways a little bit above 280,000 ISK. That's not that bad. 277,000 for the sellers and 254 for the buyers. Really decent comeback when it comes to general inflationary expectations and things like that. I think hypercore can be tied to almost anything through activity in the what hell is it called now? Local, let's see, Hypernet Relay. There we go, Hypernet offers. It is a metric for, I think, general activity. A massive decline in this would indicate lower activity, but also a little bit of a gauge for inflation, I think, as well, which I would say in the last couple of months we're expecting that to make a little bit of a comeback. With the keys, 20 trillion is potentially coming back into the game as well. And now, of course, with CCP just giving out ISK, that should all be decently inflationary. So let's take a look at the minerals. You may already have spotted a big mover for megasite in these minerals as well. But let's get started at 1050. And we will get started as always with titanium, that for the average prices is up a little bit. Look at that, very nice here. Slight upswing, it's barely visible, but 5-day moving average above the 20-day moving average, and then the daily average is above that as well, showing a little bit of upward pressure here. So in GTF44, sellers are coming in at 460, it was 458 actually when I was making the ticker, 447 for the buyers. A little bit of upward pressure there. I do think that maybe a little bit of expectation on CCP announcing last quarter of this year being the official end of the drought phase for resources and things like that in EVE Online, that players are expecting an increase in industrial activity as well. I think that's enough time to also go through a lot, if not all of the stocks, but definitely a lot of the stocks that were produced in April with the rush before the industry changes, and after that we'll slowly be adapting to the new reality, and then I do think that activity may pick up, and thus prices for titanium might pick up as well. Then we'll have to be lucky. In the dev blog or the July announcement, CCP did say that they would increase the availability of all resources. I'm personally sort of thinking there's little reason to do so for instance, titanium. I mean, it's already historically I'd put it at like 6 ISK as a normal price. Here it's become 4.5, so I think that Tech One Minerals may not be part of that equation. Morphite might be the one exception in this list, but that the focus will be on all of the extra stuff that's super expensive at the moment and basically making capital ship production, for instance, completely uneconomical. I'm personally expecting a little bit more focus there than on the minerals, and then a move like this for titanium to actually slightly move up on all of these announcements, to me, makes perfect sense. Then we've got pyrite seeing the same thing, also a slight uptick here with the 5-day moving average going above the 20-day moving average, up to 1850 for the sellers, 18 ISK for the buyers, really narrow margin. Still not great, but you can also see that by the end of this page, which is not that big in volumes, we're not seeing hundreds of millions of pyrite or something like that on the market either. We're already heading for 19 ISK, so potentially I do think we're looking at slight upwards pressure in minerals for this week. Let's take a look at what Mixelon has done. Exactly that, look at that 5-day moving average. Very timidly, slight uptick in volumes, but very timidly above the 20-day moving average in a slight upswing as well. 61.50 almost for the sellers and almost 60 ISK for the buyers as well. Narrow margin forced up here. We do still have a seller of 100 billion ISK, but everything else feels in line with another sizing of volumes compared to pyrite, and it's still high SEC, so this is definitely still a decent price, I'm going to say, for the current condition in Mixelon. But yeah, later down the line, again, all of this production here, which is going to be a lot of capitals, super capitals, battleships, battle cruisers, everything that changed with the industry and became a lot harder, a lot more expensive, will still have pretty big stocks in there. But give it this up until the last quarter, and we may actually be chewing through a lot of these as well, especially if in nullsec they decide to have their final battle there as well. could be interesting. Then we move on to Losec with Isogen, maintaining a price above 60. Let's take a look at that. 62 ISK now for the sellers, 59 for the buyers. We still have some stocks to go through. That to me is pretty obvious. This is an anomaly, 100 million. Put in here a week ago at 62 ISK, 250. That's been here for quite a while at 63 ISK, but at least we don't have the 2 billion units anymore. And then that's pretty much it. We still have, this is a little bit suspect, right? These batches of 10 million in all likeliness are the same player as well, but 40 million units, that can get through pretty easily. Here, what's visible in the sell orders is basically 350 million units. If this is what we still have to go through to then finally get the other volumes to become what's available for Isogen, at the moment it's a competitive price with Mexalon, but then of course I personally am expecting Isogen to go up in price substantially. And from that perspective, honestly, that fourth quarter of this year to end the resource scarcity, to me does still make sense if you're looking at Isogen as well. That still has some stocks that are keeping us from having the current input versus output dynamic to really take over the price discovery for Isogen. So current production against current consumption is, in my opinion, a higher price than 60. And should also see way more movement. You can see here as well that 2 billion unit sell order here had kept everything below 45 here for 3-4 months straight, very, very stable. Then once you go through or the sell order lapses, you get a little bit of activity on maybe an announcement, but then you again have these ceilings that are very hard for Isogen to break through. That's these old stocks keeping everything in check. Something completely different for Noxium, that's actually moving with the market way more. So you've got the upside move here from 500 to 1500. That's just everything drying up. You need to go to Losec to bring this in. Then we get the April rush that pushed us to 2000 ISK, very close in all likeliness to an all-time high price of Noxium. And then of course after this we've got the end of the industry rush, the changes that meant lower demand for Noxium, and then as well the summer slump. And here now we've got that pick up again, 5-day moving average going back above the 20-day moving average. So we do have this crossing of the streams where potentially we are in an upwards phase on the CCP announcement, the tax changes, the war heating up a little bit, probably increasing demand. And that's very good news for those that are able to go into Losec, grab that Noxium. 1100 ISK for the sellers, 1000 ISK for the buyers. Is definitely a good price for Noxium, but you can see here when we don't have these stocks, so what we see, 1.5 million, 2.5 million, those are 6 million here, those are the big sell orders. Everything else is like a million and below, 100,000, couple 100,000, something like that. Yeah, that's gatherable in a session. Bring it to Jita, sell it at that price, maybe a couple of sessions for smaller ships or newer players, but you don't see 100 million units of Noxium keeping the price in check. That in my opinion represents all stocks. No, this is way more volatile, moves with the entire market. Price discovery is dependent on what's produced now and what's consumed right now, and as a result you also have this massive premium since Noxium is actually the most expensive mineral at the moment. In Losec, things have been kept in check a little bit more, or more stable, you could say. So here we still have Zydrine, also slight uptick here as well, 5-day moving average above 20-day, 873 for the sellers and 868 for the buyers, but still less expensive than the Losec gathered Noxium. And then we've got the biggest move here, which was in Megasite. Let's see what's happening here. Definitely an uptick in volumes. I would not be surprised that there's like a little bit of prep again for the increased activity after the summertime, and with the absorption of the April spike in general, we could really see an uptick, and then Megasite may actually have to make that move up to catch up with Zydrine. Finally, 725, 735 for most sellers, 635 for the buyers. Buyers still very wary. That is a pretty big margin opening up. That's kind of normal when the price jumps 20%. 10% over the course of a week. And then finally, we've got Morphyte, and this is the opposite move, which I would say is good news and potentially a little bit of speculation here as well. So after reaching a one-year high at least of 130,000, maybe even an all-time high for Morphyte, we have the 5-day moving average, unlike almost all the other minerals, going below the 20-day moving average, back down to 100,000 ISK, 112 for the sellers, 104 for the buyers. And what's the speculation? To me, again, that July announcement, with the announcement that we're going to increase resource availability across the board. If there's one resource in all likeliness for minerals that could be in the crosshairs for CCP for a lower price and more availability, it could definitely be Morphyte, and maybe the market's anticipating that a little bit already as well, cutting down on that massive premium from the start of the year. Historically speaking, when I've been doing ETH Talk and looking for Morphyte to buy as an investment, I bought this stuff below 10,000 ISK. Just to give you guys that perspective, it is extremely pricey at the moment. Next up, we've got the PI market 2030. Like that. Let's go through the list. With all of these changes and announcements and things happening, I honestly expect advanced PI materials to just hold the line and maybe a little bit of an uptick in all the others as well. So here, for instance, broadcast nodes, definitely a big purchase right here. That's a lot of them, including data points up to 2 million ISK. A couple of days ago, it's back down to 1.6 million, but availability compared to demand, definitely a turn, definitely something a little bit different here. Let's see if it's being traded oh, there we go. It's actually being traded in the Tranquility Trading Tower as well. 1.55 million for the sellers, 1.3 million almost for the buyers. So we're seeing a little bit of pressure, but at least here, again, advanced PI material needed now in carriers and things like that. You've got that stronger demand that is keeping the price in check. And from time to time, you also have some pretty big buyers, again, potentially speculating on increased industry activity in the fourth quarter or starting around there. Then trying to buy low makes a lot of sense. Construction blocks very flat, so not seeing that upswing just yet at around 7,000, 7,100 for the first seller, 6,800 for the buyers. Oh, that's actually out, so we'll do the JITA ranges actually on this one. Almost 8,000 for the buyers. Yeah, maybe we need a little bit more time, but perhaps a little bit of upward pressure is here. The problem is, the buyers just aren't there. That's a super big margin for something that's already this cheap. Consumer electronics, continuing to confirm the lack of demand trend, down to 5,000 ISK, which is in my opinion less than half its normal 10,500 average price. 5,400 for the sellers, 5,100 for the buyers, and this is showcasing that complete lack of demand for some of these refined PI materials at the moment. Coolants is trying to hold on, but going back down below 9,000 ISK. Just below that for the sellers, 7,800 for the buyers. Bit of margin opening up here again as well. Cryoprotectant solutions. Here, honestly, I would not be surprised if ETH Talk has a little bit of an impact on this as well. Notice the two spikes here, unlike almost all the other PI materials or specialized PI materials, we do have very nice spikes up to 130 and 120,000 ISK in October and in January. These are tied to implant announcements, and so buying at the lowest possible points. If you grab some of that super cheap cryoprotectant solutions, and then CCP comes out with a set of implants, for instance for the Vorton projector or for other stuff, you're making bank on that. And I keep mentioning this in my ETH Talks as well. At the moment, selling for less than 100,000 ISK, buyers coming in just above 90,000 ISK. If you can buy close to 90K, and then you could sell at 130, 120 on an announcement for an implant, that's definitely a trade that potentially, in my opinion, has a high chance of happening. And so slowly buying at these low prices makes a lot of sense to me. So despite this pressure, we are seeing some volume spikes that are keeping everything from crumbling down, which for instance consumer electronics is clearly doing. Enriched uranium tied to fuels also feeling the pressure back below 10,000 ISK. 9.4 for the sellers, 9.1 for the buyers. Integrity response drones still suffering an annoying data point, but yeah, 175 million, able to maintain that. And again, some pretty big purchases once in a while, here. So this is definitely needed in industry. 1.75 million for the sellers, going up to 1.85 very quickly, and then 1.5 million for the buyers. Decent price and easily maintained under the new industry rules, and that's without increased activity, right? So increased demand all of a sudden for maybe capital ships and things like that. Pretty interesting to me. Mechanical parts going back down below 7k. 7,000 for the sellers, 6.7 for the buyers. Then we get nanites again here and here, probably potentially something you could look into for that speculation on implants. Pretty low at the moment, right? Definitely touching the low point of the chart, but also bouncing back up of that a little bit. I would not be surprised if some speculative money is already entering these markets. 4,780 for the buyers, 4.6 for the 4,780 for the sellers, 4.6 for the buyers. Very low demand. If you want some cheap nanites, this is definitely the time to try and stock up on those slowly. Don't want to spook the market too much. Nano factories had been losing ground over the last couple of months, but look at that again. Volume spike happening, pushing the price back towards 900k on the chart. Couple coming in here, 840,000 for the sellers, 720 for the buyers. But you do see this demand coming from somewhere. That happens quite regularly. Same thing right here again. Actually pushing 5-day moving average above 20-day moving average, so definitely a turnaround here. 790k for most sellers, 710 for the buyers. Again, I think this is speculation on potential industry needs that will come in the future. CCP also announced those capital PVE sites, so that's definitely like, if they're worth it, if they're fun to do and the rewards are high enough, that could spur a lot of players into trying to get into capital ships, which would require production. So all of this, I think, is definitely working from the announcement that CCP made in July. Recursive computing module, same things, spike here, and then this is starting to flatten out. Very difficult to read this chart because of an anomalous data point. Back above 1 million for the sellers and almost 900,000 ISK for the buyers. Our robotics continue to suffer now. A trade range of 55,000 to 60k. That's pretty terrible. 60k for the sellers, 57,000 for the buyers. Historical normal price for robotics, 100,000 ISK. So yeah, super cheap. Self-harmonizing power cores, same volume spike here again as we touch 1.5 million with a bit of a bounce from that. 1.53 for the sellers, 1.4 million for the buyers. So it's just, you know, pretty obvious here again. Sterile conduits, look at the volume spike the last couple of days. There is some speculation happening around potentially a lot of industry needs coming down the pipeline as CCP introduces what they have announced. There's some aggressive selling happening here as well, but overall that seems to be the story, and we've got our first real turnaround as well. Yukomi superconductors that were below 70k for most of the time. Look at this here as well, up to 100,000 in October, another spike on implants, and this one is going up substantially all of a sudden. 94,000 for the sellers and 73,000 for the first buyer. Definitely a very big move here all of a sudden in the price. Potentially that would have been tradable, and again, if you've slowly bought when the chart hit 60k, which it did here, plenty of buy opportunities to slowly grab some cheap Yukomi superconductors. You are looking at a very nice sell opportunities. I do think it has been possible to buy this below 60,000 ISK. You're selling at a 50% profit right now. So this is why I keep pointing at these opportunities. These have that potential for that volatility when you still see it on the chart as well, on something happening in the game, a need for certain implants all of a sudden or something like that. And then finally, the wetware mainframe also has the volume spike that all these advanced PI materials seems to have, and probably keeping the price above 1.5, yeah, by quite a bit. 175 for the sellers, 1.5 million for the buyers. So PI is actually looking pretty interesting, especially with advanced PI having that extra demand after the industry changes. Next up, advanced moon materials, 2910. Here what was announced in the July update that could have an impact on this market is that CCP says no changes to Tech 2 production. That's definitely not what we expected, at least not what I expected, after CCP had first laid out that industry changes were a first step on a massive plan to overhaul everything in the game. It seems like maybe the impact that they're seeing at the moment from the first industry changes is telling them, hey, maybe Tech 2 should not go the exact same route with even more nerfs, even more problems for them to solve. It's already pretty damn complex. Honestly, it's already too complex for a solo player, and that should really, in my opinion, be your cutoff point for some stuff where, you know, it pretty much requires an alliance to get into doing especially Tech 2. So you can do some small stuff solo, but honestly it is very, very intensive. You need multiple accounts and things like that, in my opinion. So this is why I think CCP decided that, yeah, EVE is known to be complex. Tech 2 is definitely one of those aspects that's already up there for complexity. No need to change that one. So let's get started. Actually, here is crystalline carbonite, and then this is in line with what I would expect, that at least a portion of the premium that we've been paying in the last 4 months or so is also speculation on that potential change that CCP would then announce for Tech 2 production. And here now we've got crystalline carbonite falling back to 150, which is back in its normal trade range before all of this speculative bubble stuff happening. 155 for the sellers and 145 for the buyers. Now I still think that, especially with all the ISK that's flowing into the game at the moment, we could still be looking at a premium. Tech 2 is basically, compared to where Tech 2 is now, way more doable in complexity as well. Both are rivaling them, right? Big Tech 1 ships have basically moved up in complexity towards Tech 2, and so that increased demand for Tech 2 could definitely still be there, but we're not gonna go with these massive premiums of double the price of a year ago. Then we've got non-linear metamaterials for, no, not metamaterials, goddammit, we're looking for the carbides first here, there we go. The titanium carbide for Caldari production, same story, you can see here in April, boost up to 350 ISK, then still speculative, so a lot of upwards movements, sharp upwards movements here as well, but finally we're back in that 150 to 200 trade range. It's 170 for the sellers, 164 for the buyers, and that's basically recovered, and we're probably looking at lower volatility in the upcoming period. Then for Minmatar, it's Fernite carbide, bouncing up from 150, so we still have a premium, but we don't have the 300, 200 plus high points anymore. At this point, 170 for the sellers, 165 for the buyers, and then we've got tungsten carbide for Amar. That was already moving in that 150 to 200 range, with here in April double spike to those high points of almost 300 ISK. So carbides have basically lowered their volatility. We're still paying a bit of a premium, but it's, in my opinion, in line with just a response to Tech 2 being very much in vogue at the moment, very popular to still do in industry. Tech 2 ships being very powerful, and as a result all of that has now been absorbed. A lot of this, or some of this, was probably speculation on CCP saying in April that this was just the first track, and then of course Tech 2 would have been a logical progression, but that's no longer happening. Then we've got meta materials. Galente is photonic meta materials, bit of a volume jump here, that's interesting, but easily absorbed by the market. We're still just above 12.5. 12.6 for the sellers, 11.5 for the buyers, pretty normal. For Caldari, we've got non-linear, still moving in that 20 to 25,000 disc range. Not much to say on this one either. Then for Minmatar, it's plasmonic metamaterials, back below 20k. Honestly, this 1 year chart, couple of spikes due to the war, because the Imperium had a Tech 2 ship, let's see which one it was here, the Munin, as part of its doctrine. So there was some speculation and some rushing on plasmonic metamaterials from time to time, but if we disregard these war spikes, basically very flat around that 20,000 disc range as well. And then terahertz metamaterials for Amar production, 15k, right in the middle, a little bit lower maybe even. So overall these are still pretty stable. For the other advanced moon materials, I may expect a little bit of a turnaround in these as well, at least some bottom forming. So these have clearly struggled with a lack of demand lately, and we are seeing very low prices for these. But I think that the psychology may switch as we get into a more inflationary situation in EVE Online. So fermionic condensates still very, very low, 63,500 for the seller, 63,270. That's pretty damn low. Then we've got ferrogel. Well, at least it's stalling its descent. It is below 30,000, so that's really low as well. 29,000 for the sellers, 29,000 almost for the buyers. Fulleриdes are still going down below 750, so that's still not good news. 711 for the sellers, 709. That margin has closed, so maybe we'll finally stop. And yeah, interesting here as well, last couple of days increased volumes, maybe in line with what I was talking about. Then we've got hypersynaptic fibers still at really low price range as well, well below 10,000 disc, 9.5 for the sellers, 9.4 for the buyers. Nano transistors, yeah, stopping the descent, but at 4k, that's really low. Phenolic composites, a little bit of an uptick here. That's, you know, back on the average price. And then ceramic fibers had to go down below 400 as well, and is stalling at the end to go even lower. So that's the situation. Clearly these advanced moon materials are still suffering with a lack of demand, these other advanced moon materials, but a little bit more ISK availability may actually start to stem the bleeding on these. Then the Tech 2 ships. I haven't done anything too special, actually nothing over the last week now that I think about it for trading, so we're not gonna check the holdings. Let's go through the list, coming in at 36 minutes. And let's see if we can spot some trends or opportunities. Here is the Basilisk. That's not the chart that we want for Tech 2. Flat around the 230 million mark. 230 for the sellers, 209 for the buyers. At least buyers are slowly drying up on this one. So potentially with a bit more supply, we could be looking at a buy opportunity, but we'll have to try to time that. At the moment, average prices are on the sellers, so it is very difficult to do. We'd need to see a bit of breakdown in average price for that to materialize. Too late to sell, too early to buy, not the right spot. Cerberus is actually slowly moving on that 250 million range as well. Maybe a slight buy opportunity at 250 million, buyers at 230 though, so definitely not a great place to be either. Then we've got the Guardian staying well above 200 million as well. 200 million for the sellers, 190 for the buyers. So what I don't like, you can see these high points going down and down, these low points going up and up, and this is not great if you're looking to buy and sell with a profit. So this is also not looking good. Stealth bombers last week were looking pretty interesting on the downtrend, and yeah, unfortunately this was potentially something that could happen as well, is that your buy opportunity only lasted for like 2 days right here when the average price went down to less than 24 million ISK. We're already selling back at 29, buyers are still at around that 24. So basically the oversupply situation stalled very quickly and the average prices shot back up. So if you managed on this downtrend to buy some cheap ones below 25 million by quite a bit, you've got a small trade on your hands, but it's not easy to make a lot of ISK in this either. Then the Iquitursa staying flat below 700 million. All right. 690 for the sellers, 637 for the buyers. I think CCP also talked a little bit about some of the changes that they've done to Triglavian space. which potentially should stabilize this a little bit, make it more accessible for players, and so hopefully we will see trick prices not shoot up to 900 million here again. Then we get the Ishtar. That looks potentially a little bit more interesting. So we are again playing with that same low point of around a month ago, going well below 230 million. 215 for the sellers, 207 for the buyers. Completed trades. I have done an Ishtar trade. Let me show you what I bought. 206 million including taxes for the purchase, 221 including taxes, so after taxes for the buy, 15 million profit on an Ishtar. And we're starting to get very close to this range. If we can lose these two 207s, then potentially you are looking at a potential buy opportunity for the Ishtar. Then the Manticore, yeah, as we reach that bottom price of 25 million, here's the volume. So the market moved very quickly on that, pushing us back up to 30 million ISK, 31 for the sellers, 25 still for the buyers. They're staying behind a little bit, but on this chart right now, with 5-day moving average, crossing the 20-day, getting back to 30 million, unfortunately, your chances of picking up a buy order are super low. When it's the exact opposite, when we're on this downtrend heading towards these two data points, that's when you can actually grab these buy orders, these cheap buy orders. So that's really the lesson that I've been learning here. Munin on the war happening here, a nice moonshot to moonshot, let's not call it that, a nice uptick in price back to 250 million from an average price below 200, 250 almost for the sellers, 232 for the buyers. So there was definitely a small wartime trade to be had here for those in the know. Felt a little bit speculative, would have loved to see us touch 180 before having to jump in, but the Munin showing that the war is definitely a driver for Tech 2 volatility as well, if you know what they'll be flying. Then Nemesis, more bad news, I would say. So we again here had a data point close to 22.5 million last week. I said, yeah, all these stealth bombers potentially look to be in a pretty good spot, but then volumes up for 5 days straight. We're back above 25 million, 26 for most sellers, 22.3 million for the buyers. So everything gets absorbed very quickly, and right now it's next to impossible to grab a buy order in this range anymore. Then we've got the Oneros, slight uptick from 180, but not as high as I would like to see it. So that's another too late to buy and definitely not enough to sell. The Panther is flattening out back on its average. So for production costs, we'll have to disregard this announcement here from CCP. And overall, this is basically pretty flat. I'm not noticing like super inflation in price or anything like that. The Purifier, same story right here. We touched 25 million, couple of days of volumes pushes back to 30 million average. It's 30 million for the sellers, 25.5 million for the buyers. So basically last week you could have jumped in, but you're not getting that good of a trade. There's definitely profit in it though. Then we've got the Scimitar. Again, 200 to 30 range, that's another no for me. The Widow, still paying a premium from the start of the year, but definitely stabilizing below 1.25 billion. And then the Zealot, I think another wartime spike right here. Definitely a big purchase in the volumes, pushes up to 250 million, and we are back down to 224 for the sellers and 190 million and below for the buyers. You could consider to buy one of these if you expect another need for a Zealot fleet to be fielded there. We're on the downtrend, right? You can see here the pressure on that 5-day moving average, which does mean that these buyers have a chance to get triggered very close to 190 million ISK. So Tech 2, yeah, not the best spot for trying to find buy opportunities this week, unfortunately. Then we have the Tech 3 ships, or I'll quickly take a look at my holdings just to see what's happening there. So my holdings is the Confessor, bought for 35 million after taxes, selling now for 43. All right, that is a slight upswing right here. Potentially, we definitely have a bit of a profit there. Then the Endurance, bought for 19.5 million, selling for 21.2. We're still not in profit after taxes, although with the tax changes, we should definitely look into that. But we're seeing a slight upwards pressure here as well. I bought one Manticore for 27 million. I actually bought that one a while ago. I'm not exactly sure where. One of these dips, I believe. It's currently selling for 31 million, maybe a slight profit there as well, but nothing too major. Bought in on euros for 165 after taxes. Those are selling for 190, so that's definitely already looking pretty good. But the potential, I definitely want to try to sell well above 200 million. So I have the patience there. And then a prospect bought for 21 million, and that one also made a move over the last week, selling for 25 million. We're finally in a little bit of profit for the prospect potentially as well. So those are my holdings, and yeah, I keep an eye on them. But honestly, at the moment, I'm still looking to turn my cash into good holdings. So I'm looking for buy opportunities mostly. Tech 3 coming in at 43.50. Like that, and yeah, we just saw the confessor, so a little bit of upwards pressure. 43 million for the sellers, 37 million for the buyers, and that's because fresh supply is slowly drying up here for the confessor, which was to be expected. It was the cheapest one of all of these destroyers, but good news for my purchase there. Hecate is still going up as well, back to that 50 million range on slightly higher volumes. 49 million for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers, and even here we're not seeing that much 89 days or fresh supply or anything like that happening either, so there should still be more production going somewhere else. There it is apparently. The Jackdaw that did push down to 40 million is back above 45 million on very noticeable and sustained increased volumes. 46 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers. We got 18 here last 24 hours. Last week or so, we do have another 100 Jackdaws to probably take advantage of this spike right here. We're not seeing that much active production, so overall I think we could be in for an upwards move as the Zwepel slows down its descent, although it's coming from a one-year high as well, almost at 55 million. So it's landing on 42 million for the sellers, still 40 million for the buyers, but a lack of demand is very obvious here in this vehicle as well. So the tactical destroyer market, we're just not seeing that much supply, and if there's a ship that does have a little bit of room to go back up in price, it's probably the confessor. Hecate's already done so, Jackdaw has done so, and then yeah, the Zwepel as well, but this is surprisingly low demand for the Zwepel. If you feel like really gambling, try to buy a Zwepel below 40 million ISK. You might even be able to get it. So, but is that a good purchase? Honestly, I'm still not sure. Then we've got the cruisers. I think we saw a big move in the Tengu as well on the ticker, so let's take a look at this. The Legion staying below 200 million, 195 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. This surprises me a little bit, although it's still pretty expensive on this full 1 year chart. I honestly think that the Legion is often flown in nullsec in big fleets, so kind of expected that one to have a bit more volatility. Loki is 230 million, all right, 222 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers at the moment. Definitely very expensive as well. Not noticing too many volume spike on this one. Then we've got the Proteus, that's definitely up in volumes and still decently cheap, below 200 million for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. So there may actually be fielding Tech 3 fleets based on the cheapest price at the moment. And then finally we get the Tengu, where we do have the spike, 1 year high point here going up to 280 million. This is where the interest is, 250 million for most sellers, 222 for the buyers. Definitely a ship that I'm looking to train into as well, to be honest. So that's the winner, you could say, of the Tech 3 cruisers. This to me is still a market where I'm not going to take any gambles at the moment, because we have to absorb, that new situation where we no longer lose skill points on the explosion of a Tech 3 cruiser, and I do think the market still has to find itself a little bit. It has always been one with low availability on the sellers, which also means that any medium-sized wallet could do manipulation attempts in these types of markets. Combine that now with the increased popularity. It's not, well, actually it's coming from Mermal space. So I do think that an upswing in industry there is possible as well to meet all of that demand. So it's very difficult to speculate at the moment on exactly where these Tech 3 cruisers are going. You can also see just like the Tengu last month, up from 180 to 280 million ISK, almost double the price. So this is one move, and then you get the Legion that actually very quickly retraced, went back down to 280 and is back in the range that it had for 6 months before all of these changes. So you get such a diverse amount of moves that to me it's really difficult to say exactly what's going to happen in these tactical cruisers. And then for the extra product this week, coming in at 48.30. I got a request on Twitter to actually take a look at very specifically the Caldari faction ships. So I'm going to honor that one. Let's see if there's like Navy factions for, there we go, Drake Navy issue. So I'll just go through the list up, down here and look for the Caldari faction ship. So here is the Drake Navy issue. Okay, actually an interesting chart. You can see most of the year it went for 250 to 300 million ISK, started the year at 150, and we're actually just going back down in the last couple of months and starting to turn around on that one. 178 million for the sellers, 160 million for the buyers, if you're in the know for potentially maybe what's happening in Caldari faction warfare. To me, this chart looks like your final chance to jump in on some cheap Drake Navy issues, and then if the trend goes back up here as well, you're looking at potentially a very interesting trade. Let's see if this is a trend, because that is pretty interesting. Faction battleships, Navy, and then we've got the Raven Navy issue. Yep, similar chart, not as good as the Drake just before, but you can see here starts the year really low, above 400 million ISK, goes to 700 million, even 800 million at the peak in May. Then we start a decline, so cheaper loyalty points here. For this one, currently selling for 590. Buyers are still above 500 million ISK, but relatively speaking, this does look like it's actually pretty damn cheap. Then we get the other one. Here is the Scorpion Navy issue. Ooh, and the turnaround here as well at the tail end as we reach that same low point as we did last year. We're talking 526 million for the sellers, but 480 and 464 even if you can get rid of this one buy order. Unfortunately, I would say that we are just too late for the easy purchases. That was around 10 days ago when we have these 4 or 5 days of average prices at 440 million or something like that. But the volume has come in and that has jumped the price up. The question is, do the cheap loyalty points continue a little bit? Could create more buy opportunities, of course. Next up, we've got the cruisers, so faction cruisers, Navy faction, and then we'll look for Caracal Navy issue. Yeah, very same story, and actually still on the decline. If you're looking for that purchase close to 50 million, 54.5 for the buyers, 63 million for the sellers. Again here the peak in May at 130, going down substantially, way more volumes, more availability in loyalty points. If you're looking for that investment based on the waves of faction warfare, this looks like a good place to jump in on some Caldari ones. I think next is the Osprey. Yep, that looks like a Caldari ship, and it's the exact same story again. How much lower, how much below 60 million are the buyers? 57 million. Buying an Osprey Navy issue below 60 million, I don't think is a bad thing at all. So very interesting. Let's see if we don't have faction destroyers, frigates, faction frigates, Navy. We do have a Caldari Navy hook build that's telling that same story. Sharp decline. Must be the wave of faction warfare for Caldari, with them being pretty damn successful. 14 million for the sellers, 10 million for the first buyer, buying at around 10 million for a Caldari Navy hook build. Seems like a pretty good deal to me. And then finally, it is the Griffin, I believe. Yep. Alright, this one still very popular, it seems. Not really able to go much below 15 million. 14 for the sellers, 12.4, and this on really not a lot of demand. I'd say wait it out a little bit. If the faction warfare situation continues, you may get an even better buy opportunity for the Griffin Navy issue. But this was a very interesting announcement. I'd actually never done faction ships in this manner, and this potentially is something that will make a return, because I think this was a very interesting look, very specifically on all of the Caldari faction subcapitals, and we could see that trend, although it's not as visible here on the Griffin Navy issue. Let's actually quickly go back to the Drake Navy issue that really showed that very nice trend right here. And then this is something that it's not the short-term trades of tick 2, tick 3, but it is medium to long-term investments, you could say. You know, that's something that you can do here, because eventually we will have Caldari being pushed back or lowering in activity, or whatever happens with their loyalty point becoming expensive again, and that's when the Drake Navy issue is going to go back above 250 million ISK. So if you can buy them now, yeah, that does make for an investment. Very, very nice suggestion. Thank you very much for that. There may become like a little bit of a rotation in these factions then to look at through all of their ships, to take a look at what's happening there and if there are opportunities. And I would say right now, yeah, Caldari faction warfare ships are very cheap on the charts. So if you want to buy these for longer term investments, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. I'm motivated. I'm probably going to make a trip to Jita and try to grab some cheap ones, to be honest. So yeah, thank you very, very much. Very interesting suggestion, and a very nice way to actually take a look at these faction ships and get a better handle on the trends. And that's it then for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.